And then in terms of number one, in the restoration of the diplomatic missions, you'll remember that the first big tit of the tit for tats was after the Skripal poisoning. And the U.S., under one of your predecessors, Mr. Tillerson, expelled a lot of Russian diplomats, to which they responded. The consulate in St. Petersburg got closed down by the Russians. You guys closed down the consulate in Seattle, several others. Are those going to reopen?
Well, that's what we're going to be talking about. And ultimately, again, I'm not going to negotiate or work on that in public. That's what these channels will be about. But ultimately, what the goal we need to have is we have to have some normalcy in our missions.
Okay, my last one. But does that mean if you get the staffs back to the normal operational level and staff at the embassies, that you consider the Skripal case of the Crimea annexation to be closed? There are no longer issues? Because I think, you mentioned that Keir Starmer is going to be in Washington next week. I can imagine that the Brits won't be particularly.
Yeah, again, I'm not going to negotiate or talk through every element of the disruptions that exist or have existed in our diplomatic relations and the mechanics of it. Suffice it to say that President Trump has pledged and intends to keep his promise to do everything he can to bring an end to this conflict. We cannot do that unless we have at least some normalcy in the way our diplomatic missions operate in Moscow and in Washington, D.C. And when you talk about an enduring and sustainable end to the conflict, it means one that's acceptable to everyone involved in it. And that obviously includes Ukraine, but also our partners in Europe, and of course the Russian side as well.
And what the president did not find acceptable was an endless war in Europe that was literally has turned into a meat grinder of people on both sides. And the killing fields of eastern and southern Ukraine is unacceptable. It is not in the interest of either country. It's not in the interest of the world, and certainly not in the interest of the United States and Europe.
And the third is, together with those other two, is beginning to engage in identifying the extraordinary opportunities that exist should this conflict come to a acceptable end, the credible opportunities that exist to partner with the Russians geopolitically on issues of common interest, and frankly economically on issues that hopefully will be good for the world and will also improve our relations in the long term between these two important countries. The second one will be difficult, which is the question of Ukraine and the end of that conflict. But I think that's essential in order for the third piece to even be possible, which is our ability to work together on other geopolitical matters of common interest, and of course some pretty unique, potentially historic economic partnerships as well. The key that unlocks the door for those opportunities, however, is the end to this conflict.
To not only end the war, but then to unlock what could be very productive and stabilizing relationships going forward.
And so the only thing President Trump's trying to do is bring about peace. It's what he campaigned on. It's something the world should be thanking President Trump for doing. He's been able to achieve what for 2.5, 3 years no one else has been able to achieve, which is to begin this process, a serious process. Obviously, a lot of work remains before we have a result, but President Trump's the only one that can do it.
Look, it's common sense. If you're going to bring both sides together, you have to talk to both sides. The fact that a third of our NATO allies still do not contribute the minimum of 2% of their GDP to defense a decade after that we all collectively made that agreement isn't acceptable. We have the NATO summit coming up this June, and we would expect with the type of conflict, the type of warfare and destruction we've seen in Europe, sadly the last several years, that we have 100% at the minimum, and in fact are exceeding that. So if you just think about, just in a few months, President Trump has shifted the entire global conversation from not if the war is going to end, but just how it's going to end. And only President Trump can do that. And in the Oval Office less than a week ago, both President Putin and President Zelensky both said to him, only you, President Trump, could drive this war to a conclusion.
What's important to understand is two things. The first is the only leader in the world who can make this happen, who can even bring people together to begin to talk about it in a serious way, is President Trump. He's the only one in the world that can do that right now. And President Trump is committed to bringing an end to this conflict, and as he said when he campaigned for president. That's not going to be easy to achieve, but he's the only one in the world that can begin that process. Donald Trump is the only leader in the world that could initiate that process.